You know, that ID card I got from Huey wouldn't let me into the lab.
Of course not. I deactivated it.
Why?
As though I'd let him into my lab.
Oh, you don't seem to care for him much, even though you two are in the same field.
Oh, please. For starters, I can't stand that wishy-washy attitude of his. If he's got something to say to me, he should be a man and come say it in person, not write some furtive letter.
But if his card doesn't work, how's he supposed to—
And another thing, the way he always demeans himself. Every other sentence begins with, I could be wrong, but... Why can't he just do what he does and be confident about it?
Well, there was the thing about his dissertation being plagiarized.
The real problem is he doesn't have a whit of independence in him. In Costa Rica, and even back at NASA, he was always following people around, asking if there was some way he could help. Why doesn't he stop his whining, take a stand, and face up to me?
I think I know how he feels.
And to top it all off, he seems to enjoy referring to himself by that nickname I gave him. I simply don't get it. How can he be so submissive?
So, Huey was a nickname you gave him.
That's right. I took it from the name of a drone in the science fiction film Silent Running.
Drone?
It's a type of worker robot. The way he follows people, just waiting for them to boss him around, is so similar. I couldn't help myself. Oh, it's an American film directed by Douglas Trumbull, the man who did the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Imagine that. A scientist who likes science fiction.
And that's not all.
There's more.
He's a man.
Hang on. I seem to remember you saying he should be more of a man.
Yes. Well, he is an awfully good scientist. Without his reptile pod, my mammal pod wouldn't function, just as the cerebrum can't exist without the cerebellum and the brainstem. He did a fine job of designing it. I'll give him that.
That sounded suspiciously like praise.
It's merely an objective observation. I like people who possess the will to move forward. I have no time for those who refuse to take control of their lives. Until he does, my opinion remains the same.
So, you and Cecile seem to be enjoying yourselves back at that lab.
What are you insinuating? I only kept her because I didn't want our secret to be known.
And the personal baths? You could have left her in there alone and locked the door from the outside.
Yes, well, she seemed anxious, so I...
Now, why would she be anxious?
She was beautiful. I was only admiring her beauty.
She was terrified.
I never meant her any harm. She knew that. I know she did.
But she felt like she was in enough danger to run away.
No matter what I did, if Coltman found her, she would have been... You're right. The truth is, I wanted to save her. But not if it meant forestalling the completion of Mammal.
So you made it easy for her to escape?
Do you really think I am that soft? I'll admit security wasn't exactly tight. It wouldn't have been difficult for her to escape from the building.
Seemed like she had a rougher time after she got out.
At any rate, I never did anything to her to deserve any blame. Is that clear?
Okay. I believe you. How's the Zeke AI different from Peace Walker's?
Zeke's AI isn't a replica of the human thought process. It isn't programmed to make decisions about nuclear retaliation. On the other hand, it is capable of highly independent action in combat when given orders from a pilot. It can protect infantry, destroy the enemy, and, if ordered...
launch a nuke.
Let us hope it never comes to that.
My sentiments exactly.
I'd better fill you in on Zeke's speech synthesis system.
Speech synthesis system?
Humans speak for the conventional weapons they wield, but an autonomous AI weapon is a different story. If the AI can't communicate with surrounding forces, how can they function as a unit?
True. Verbal communication is critical on the battlefield.
Thus, an AI weapon requires a dedicated system to produce speech. To be precise, though, only Peace Walker was capable of self-generated speech. All the other AI simply repeat preset messages depending on the situation. Zeke is no different. However, you do have the ability to set those messages as you please. To create a message, go to the Extras menu, and then select Edit Mode.
You thought of everything.
You can even have it sing, too.
Sing?
Song can be a very valuable asset. I realized that at the lake. Naturally, Zeke's AI doesn't allow for it to perform original compositions. It can only play back recordings provided to it. I doubt you're much of a composer, Snake. But you could always have a go at the lyrics.
Pull out all the AI's memory boards before the pod is ejected. The black memory boards are locked. Go after the boards with icons over them.
I'm about to leave for Costa Rica, a place completely unfamiliar to me, and on a top-secret mission for the CIA, no less. No guarantees I'll come back alive. Might even get rubbed out by the CIA itself. So I'm leaving behind this record. For her sake. For the boss's honor. Ever since I was a child, I've loved to look up at the night sky. I'd go outside after sunset and drink in the cold air. The moon, Venus, so many stars floating on the edge of infinity. In Manchester, it wasn't very often you saw the night sky in all its star-studded glory, but it was enough to stir a deep longing inside me. Even as others cowered beneath Nazi air raids, I was out there, watching the skies, dreaming of one day reaching the heavens. There were, of course, more practical concerns. My skin was incredibly sensitive. Even the slightest bit of sun would turn it an angry shade of red. Playing outside during the day was completely out of the question. Naturally, I hardly ever had the chance to play with other children my age. But I never felt lonely for it. Their way of thinking was irrational, making them simple, easy to predict. The boys would talk of tanks and aeroplanes and creepy, crawly bugs. The girls of pretty dresses, glass beads, and tea and cakes. Of boys they liked. I never had much to say on such matters. The curious thing is, adults really aren't all that different. They're simple, capricious, especially men. As they get older, their heads fill with thoughts of women and more women. Thankfully, I always did have a head for mathematics. When I was about 10, I'd visit a Dr. Turing who lived nearby. We'd sit and discuss mathematical logic. The lights were always on at his house, even in the dead of night. Theoretically, he'd say, there's no algorithm that a computing machine couldn't reproduce. Dr. Turing wasn't foolish like other men, although I didn't find out why until later, after he died. The time will come, he'd say, when computers will be able to think for themselves. That idea rocked me to my core. My aptitude for mathematics brought me closer to the stars. I breezed through school, then went to America for university. While I was studying at Caltech, NASA was established. I signed up in a heartbeat. I was a pretty good computer engineer at the time, and NASA needed skills like mine. The work was enjoyable. Even though I'd given up on going into space myself, it was a pleasure just being a part of it all. I was assigned to Project Mercury, America's effort to compete with the Soviets in manned spaceflight. 7 men were chosen as pilot candidates for the program, becoming heroes overnight. People called them the Mercury 7. The project made good progress, more or less. We had all the funds and materials we needed. After countless hours of analysis, we even had plans for something on par with Sputnik. We thought it'd only be a matter of time before we caught up with the Russians. They'd sent a dog into orbit and brought it back safely to Earth. But NASA top brass dismissed that success as a fluke. The Americans recovered their re-entry capsules at sea. But the only ocean bordering the Soviet Union is the Arctic, so their re-entry capsules had to make impact on land. A dog was one thing, but human spaceflight would still take some time. Or so we thought. At the end of January 1961, we successfully put a chimpanzee named Ham into orbit. He returned to Earth as healthy as ever. NASA was giddy with success. It was then that a new woman showed up for duty. She was a backup pilot and advisor. She was beautiful, with blonde hair, strong mouth, and a steely gaze. But there was something else in those eyes, a twinkle of something warmer, of affection. It was the boss. She took one look at us in our revelry and murmured, "Savor this joy today, because tomorrow you'll have to face the truth." And she was right. The next day, our project schedule was accelerated. We'd received new information that the Soviets were mere months away from putting a man into space. The brass had misjudged the Russians. We couldn't afford to allow the shock of another Sputnik. Somehow, we had to get a man into space before the Russians did. It was an utterly impossible task. We'd only just put our first chimp up. With a human on board, failure was not an option, especially if it were one of the Mercury 7 Golden Boys. And on top of that, the brass wanted to put a window in the spacecraft. The pilot wouldn't be a test animal this time, they said, and when this hero came back alive and well, they wanted him to describe what he'd seen. It was madness. Adding a window to our existing spacecraft would leave it unable to handle the stress, not to mention the problem of shielding the occupant from cosmic rays. But the boss rose to the task, and splendidly. She claimed to be a layman when it came to space, but caught on keenly to new ideas and concepts. She was demanding, of herself and of others. She seemed rather cold-hearted at times, but I was smitten. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was wise. Her mind was thoroughly rational, and yet no matter how I tried, I could never predict her actions. It was easy for me to assume that her judgments were drawn from an enormous base of knowledge. Quite simply, her life experiences were more diverse, more intense than anyone else's. To me, they seemed boundless in their breadth. In her, I saw a reflection of the night sky. Perhaps because I too was a woman, she and I became close. I couldn't go out in the sun, but she lit up my life. Her light was soft, like that of the moon. I was so happy. With her unerring guidance, the project steadily regained its footing, but one issue remained: the pilot's safety. When the day came to choose a pilot, the Mercury 7 just quietly walked out. Who could blame them? It was far too great a risk to take. Even if they'd volunteered, NASA would never have let them go. They were national heroes, basking in the media spotlight. There was no way they'd be sent on such a mission. The conference room was silent. Then, slowly, she raised her hand, almost as if acting out a scene from a movie.